Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izo. And coming up in this edition, a vote is being held today on extending the lockdown as the health ministry says 1/4 of Israeli COVID deaths occurred in the last month. As Israel and India mark nearly 3 decades of strategic ties, a bomb goes off outside the embassy in New Delhi. And the Washington Wizards are going global with a new Hebrew website and podcast. IDF soldiers foiled a knife attack this morning at a West Bank checkpoint. Security forces say the terrorist approached troops stationed at the Gush Etzion junction near Bethlehem and was neutralized after attempting to attack a soldier with 3 blades attached to the end of a wooden stick. The attacker later succumbed to his wounds, and the IDF are continuing to investigate the incident. Israel is breaking records, the most successful vaccine campaign, and also now the country that has spent the most time in lockdown as a result of the pandemic. It seems that once again, politics may get in the way of Israel's fight against COVID. The coronavirus cabinet is set to meet today to discuss whether or not to extend the lockdown. Experts say without an extension, the virus will wreak havoc on the country's hospitals.
Israel's COVID-19 cabinet will decide today whether or not to extend the national coronavirus lockdown that has been in place for 3 weeks. It is set to expire tonight at midnight. The cabinet also voting today to decide if fines for restrictions or violators should be increased, ending a political stalemate that threatened the extension of the lockdown after the vote was postponed. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein warned over the weekend that letting political games get in the way of these decisions is dangerous.
שכל הדיבורים חסרי האחריות על כך שלא צריך להמשיך את כל ההגבלות האלה ולא צריך את הסגר וכל המשחקים הפוליטיים הזולים סביב הרצון שלנו, סביב הדרישה הרפואית שלנו להמשיך את הסגר, אלה הדברים שבסופו של דבר מביאים תחלואה קשה וגורמים גם לתמותה.
The Prime Minister is set to push for keeping the airport closed for another 2 weeks as well. The Health Ministry also reportedly considered having those who return from abroad wear an electronic ankle bracelet to ensure home quarantine is not broken. In the meantime, even as rules remain in place, many are not following them. Police broke up a party Thursday night in Rishon LeZion where a confirmed coronavirus patient was present. Most partygoers escaped before police entered the building, but officers distributed more than 100 fines. And thousands of ultra-Orthodox attended a funeral in Jerusalem for a rabbi who died from the virus. The vaccine campaign is still going strong, the country having already given more than 3 million Israelis a first dose, and 1.7 million have had both. Experts now recommending pregnant women in their first trimester should avoid the shot. Unfortunately, COVID infection rates are strong as well. On Saturday, the Health Ministry recorded 2,597 new cases with a positive infection rate of 10%. There are 1,204 Israelis in serious condition, with 310 on ventilators, and the death toll has hit 4,768. Also, with more than 1/4 of the total deaths occurring in the last month alone.
By the way, officials also revealing that 5,000 Pfizer doses will be transferred to the Palestinian Authority next week after pressure from the UN and other human rights groups. Well, Donald Trump may be out of office, but the momentum he created among countries normalizing ties with Israel is not dying out just yet. Israel and Kosovo will establish full diplomatic relations this week in a virtual signing ceremony with Israel's Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi. Israel has agreed in exchange to recognize Kosovo's independence. Here is a social media post with the announcement.
Si ministre punëve të jashtme dhe diasporës, shumë shpejt do të nënshkruajmë formalizimin e marrëdhënieve diplomatike midis shteteve tona. Ky moment historik vjen në një periudhë teje të rëndësishme për ne dhe është përjetësim I kësaj miqësie përmes lidhjes së marrëdhënieve diplomatike dhe shënon fillimin e një epoke të re mes dy vendeve tona.
All right, let's speak with international relations expert Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So this is a U.S. broker deal, but it is separate from the Abraham Accords. I just want to make sure that's correct. Why is this happening now?
Well, it is technically separated from the Abraham Accords, but it is part of the U.S. policy under the Trump administration of the efforts to try and widen the cycle of countries that normalize their relations with Israel. And now that the Trump administration is no longer in power, I think Kosovo wanted to make sure that this normalization with Israel, Kosovo being a mostly Muslim country, would have this normalization with Israel, which also entails Israel recognizing Kosovo, something that Israel has refused to do for many years.
Right, so Kosovo's independence will be recognized by Israel as part of the deal, and what does Israel get?
So as far as Israel is concerned, first of all, it was under pressure from the Trump administration to change its policy on Kosovo. For many years, Israel did not recognize Kosovo for two main reasons. First of all, it did not want to set a precedent that might apply to the Palestinian Authority, saying that if Kosovo could secede from Serbia and be recognized, then the Palestinian Authority might follow suit. And so Israel did not want to set this precedent. Also, Israel did not want to cross Russia, because Russia opposes the recognition of Kosovo, and Israel needs its cooperation with Russia over Serbia. So basically, it was pressure from the Trump administration to show an achievement in foreign policy. And in terms of what Israel gets in return is, of course, this promise from Kosovo to open its embassy in Jerusalem.
Okay, so speaking of that embassy, this will be the first Muslim-majority country to open an embassy in Jerusalem. How significant is that?
Well, it is very significant because so far all Muslim countries have refused to do so. And if we have had so far some countries opening their embassies in Jerusalem, especially, of course, the United States, but also a couple of countries from Latin America, none of those countries, of course, are Muslim or Muslim-majority countries. And so that is definitely a precedent that might encourage other countries, other Muslim countries that have relations with Israel now, to follow suit, even though I don't expect this to happen very soon, but it is definitely a welcome precedent, and it is unprecedented.
Do you foresee more countries normalizing ties with Israel and maybe even opening embassies in Jerusalem during the Biden era?
Well, hopefully the Biden administration will continue those efforts. Whether or not it will have the same leverage on those countries is an open question. I think the next countries in line who are candidates, so to speak, to normalize their relations with Israel, mostly Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world. There were talks in the last days of the Trump administration of Indonesia also normalizing with Israel. I think this should definitely be something the Biden administration would want to work on. It would be an important development in Israel's position and foreign relations in Southeast Asia.
All right, Dr. Navon, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
Israel and India celebrated nearly 3 decades of relations last week, and as they marked the milestone, a bomb went off just outside the Israeli embassy in New Delhi. While no one was injured in the attack, officials say it was terror-related. We have Israel's ambassador to India standing by to explain, but first, let's take a look at this report.
An explosion occurred near Israel's embassy in India on Friday. There were no casualties in the incident and no damage was caused to the embassy building. But the timing was interesting. It was the 29th anniversary of India-Israel relations.
कॉल यही थी कि बम ब्लास्ट हुआ है वहाँ पहुंची।
अच्छा तो कोई नुकसान हुआ क्या
नुकसान का हमें नहीं पता। शीशे 3 गाड़ियों के शीशे टूटे हैं, वो हमने नंबर ले रखे हैं।
तो आपके पास ब्लास्ट की कॉल थी?
ब्लास्ट की कॉल।
According to Indian media, a terror organization called Jaish-ul-Hind, believed to be affiliated with Iran, has taken responsibility for Friday's attack. Israel's ambassador to India, Ron Malka, had said earlier that the country had strong assumptions that the blast was a terror attack. Indian police say the explosion was caused by an improvised explosive device, or IED, and the impact from the blast could be felt within a 20 to 25 meter radius. The attack is still under investigation.
कलेक्ट करे हैं, हमने सब आईओ को हैंडओवर कर दिए हैं। एक्सप्लोजन था, अभी क्या एक्सप्लोजन था ये लेबोरेटरी में एग्जामिनेशन के बाद, केमिकल एग्जामिनेशन के बाद ही हम लोग बता पाएंगे।
Meanwhile, India's foreign minister says he assured his Israeli counterpart Gabi Ashkenazi of the fullest protection for the embassy and Israeli diplomats. Chana Rifkin, ILTV.
Like I said before, we're honored now to be joined by Israel's ambassador to India, Ron Malka. He joins us now live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
So this attack happened on the 29th anniversary of ties between Israel and India. Now an Iranian group is allegedly claiming responsibility. What is your take on Friday's events?
Well, as mentioned before, yes, it is according to our assumption, a terror attack targeting the Israeli embassy. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. And as far as we are now investigating, we are trying to get, as said before, all the pieces and the information, trying to understand who is standing behind it. It's still too early to determine now who is exactly standing behind this attack. But one of the directions of investigation is whether it is or not a coincidence that this attack occurred exactly when we marked 29 successful years of collaboration and partnership between Israel and India. We want to know if this is one of the reasons that this attack occurred exactly in this day. I can tell you that as delegates, representatives of Israel all over the world, we know that in the eyes of our enemies, we are a target. So we are always prepared with good protection and good security. Lately, following some incidents around the world, some of them related to Israel, some of them are pointing blame at Israel, we raised the level of alert. So we are very well alert, prepared, and we were not very surprised. We knew that something might happen, someone might try to harm us, but as you see, fortunately, nobody is hurt, everyone is safe, and we are taking all the measures that are needed to protect all the Israeli representatives that are here.
So even though we don't know who is behind it exactly, what made you so sure that this was indeed a terror attack and not an accident? What were the indicators here that this was targeting the Israeli embassy?
Well, there's some evidence from the scene. First of all, it's a bomb. It's a blast of a bomb very close to the embassy, just outside the embassy. And some other pieces of information that since it's an ongoing investigation, I will not get into details, but supported the assumption that this is indeed a terror attack targeting the Israeli embassy.
So even though there were no injuries in that explosion, could this possibly be a sign that, more violence is ahead following this attack?
We are prepared to any scenario. So yes, we take very seriously this attack, like we take every other attack and every threat. We don't estimate our enemies. So we are, as I said, full alert, protected, and with the strong collaboration that we have with India, and we know how much effort the Indian authorities put to protect us and to avoid any other incident like this one, we feel quite safe here.
You mentioned the collaboration between India and Israel in investigating this attack. We're also hearing reports in Israel that the Mossad might be involved in the investigation. So how are the Indian and Israeli authorities working together exactly?
Well, it's been a long time that Israel and India are collaborating and working together in many, many sectors and aspects, and of course also counter-terrorism. We have, I'd say, not only mutual values, also we have similar hostilities and threats that we are dealing with. So yes, we are collaborating in information, techniques, experience, and not only about these incidents, but on a casual and a regular basis. So our authorities know how to work together, to collaborate, to support, and to bring add value.
All right, Ambassador Ron Malka joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much, and please stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, the commander of U.S. Central Command is in Israel right now, a first high-level visit by a top American official since the inauguration of Joe Biden. General Kenneth McKenzie is in the country to discuss regional challenges, including Iran. Just last week, Israel's IDF chief of staff making controversial comments attacking American plans to renegotiate a nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic. The general's visit is also the first since the Pentagon decided to move Israel from the jurisdiction of the European Command in the U.S. military to the Central Command. Those are the sounds of rocket sirens going off in Tehran over the weekend, reportedly causing flights to divert and alarming residents. An Iranian official saying the sirens were set off by a technical mishap and there were no security threats. Interestingly enough, the incident comes amid heightened tension in the region as Iranian officials have sparred with American and Israeli leaders in recent weeks as a new administration entered the White House in Washington. Lots of developments on Iran, so let's break it down with Reserves General Dan Pfefferman. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
Reserve Major.
Excuse me, Reserve Major. Thank you for joining us.
But I appreciate the promotion.
Of course. So as we were just saying, there were rocket sirens sounded in Tehran over the weekend. Officials said it was a technical glitch, but just before that, an attack in India near the Israeli embassy claimed by an Iran-supported group. Is this a coincidence?
It seems to be a coincidence, and by all accounts, the sirens in western Tehran on Friday night, and also the Turkish plane that was rerouted, seem to be more due to the technical glitch and weather. However, yes, we do have the terrorist attack or the attempted terrorist attack near the Israeli embassy in New Delhi, and that is not that obviously is not a coincidence. It's by a group called Jaish al-Hind, which is believed to be affiliated with Iran. And in the letter that they left at the scene, they claim it's connected to the assassination last year of Soleimani by U.S. forces and of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the nuclear scientist, which is attributed to Israel.
Let's bring the U.S. perspective back into this. What are the implications of the CENTCOM chief being in Israel right now? Is he trying to deter Aviv Kochavi from antagonizing Iran with his recent comments from last week?
It certainly could be, but I don't know if I'd attribute too much of the timing of the visit to Kochavi's statements, which were a little unprecedented as far as military chiefs go. Of course, he blatantly signaled his remarks at the U.S. administration and said that if the U.S. goes back to the JCPOA and even an improved version of the JCPOA, he is preparing, as we speak, military contingency plans to strike at Iran's nuclear program. And that's something that we usually don't hear from the military echelon. Of course, only this month, in a very symbolic move with a lot of practical implications, Israel was transferred from the responsibility of EUCOM, or the European Command, to CENTCOM, Central Command. And that's one of two of the 11 regional commands through which the United States operates and manages its various military relationships and alliances throughout the world. And so I think the timing of the visit has much more to do with that, and for the United States and Israel through their new command in the region to discuss regional threats, very specifically Iran, how to coordinate their moves, how to coordinate strategies, and how to respond to the tensions that are happening in the region.
All right, interesting developments. Reserves Major Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Israel isn't worried about the U.S. reevaluating a weapons sale to the UAE. Since the beginning of Joe Biden's term in the White House, he has put on hold a sale by the U.S. of advanced F-35 fighter jets to Abu Dhabi. Donald Trump approved the sale in order to move forward with signing the Abraham Accords, with some Israeli officials saying it would threaten Israel's qualitative military edge, but later accepted that this was part of the agreement with the UAE. Netanyahu brushed off Biden's reevaluation, saying ties with the UAE are business as usual and will continue to be.
וכולם מבינים שיש פה יתרונות עצומים. זה שלום תמורת שלום, זה שלום תמורת שגשוג, זה שלום תמורת קדמה, זה שלום תמורת טכנולוגיה, זה שלום תמורת עתיד. אני לא רואה את זה. אני חושב שזה ילך קדימה.
Meanwhile, business continues to boom between Jerusalem and Abu Dhabi. The UAE reporting that in just 5 months since the signing of normalization, trade has reached more than $270 million. All right, the Washington Wizards are hoping to attract Israeli fans with a new Hebrew content push. Since signing Israeli basketball star Deni Avdia, the organization has already launched Hebrew social media pages, and their Hebrew team website will soon go live, as well as a Hebrew podcast called the Wizraeli Podcast. Yaron Talpaz is leading the new digital marketing team in Israel, and he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Yaron.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we already have a Hebrew Instagram and Twitter for the Wizards. Tell us about this new Hebrew team website, and especially about this podcast that I'm really looking forward to.
So first of all, the Instagram was just launched a couple of days ago, so it's really in its infancy. And I think it's been great so far. The response has been awesome with Twitter starting off. Obviously, in Israel, Instagram is bigger than Twitter, but I think them being an American team where Twitter is so high with all the sports teams, I think that's why they wanted to start with there. And then looking at the website and the podcast. So website is coming soon. And it will just offer everything you see on the regular websites, right? The schedule, obviously things that are now less relevant with tickets, info, stats, all of that is going to be available in Hebrew. And in terms of a podcast, then just like the team has a podcast that's called Off the Bench in English, it will have a podcast in Hebrew discussing the team, how it's doing, and with an obvious focus on Denny.
The name for the podcast is really clever. Was that your idea?
No, actually, it came from Washington side. I think it was the play-by-play announcer Justin Kutcher on the NBC local channel who came up with this. And I said right away, brilliant. So
well, he deserves all credit for that. Well, I know the team already has Japanese content after they signed a Japanese player. Does this international outreach have anything to do with the pandemic, perhaps forcing teams, to look for new audiences and new ways to make money since they can't really fill stadiums right now?
So I think in general, that's what everybody's doing because of COVID. But actually, the Japanese model is something they started once they drafted Rui Hachimura in the draft of 2019. Which was way before COVID. So they went with that. They went with a model where they're investing in all these Japanese assets. And in that case, they even brought a staff to do the almost the daily beat reporting coverage of the team in Japanese. And now they're trying to do the same thing with the Israeli model, even though Israel is a much smaller country, but they saw great engagement here because it is a basketball country. But I would say because of COVID, it's a little scaled down. And I'm doing it from Tel Aviv at first. Let's see how it goes this season. Hopefully Denny does, starts playing back, coming from the protocol, the health and safety protocol that he's been part of. So getting him back on track. Hopefully the team does a little better than the way it started. And we'll see how it goes probably for next season.
I don't know if you personally know Denny, but if you do, and if you've spoken to him lately, how's he doing out there?
Oh, he's doing great. I haven't, I know him, by the way, from when he was 14, because I was working for Maccabi Tel Aviv when he was just growing up there. But he's doing great. I think the Israeli audience is much, less patient, I would say, than he is. Analyzing every possession where he's not shooting, and he was like always saying, "Be patient, all good." I think he started the season well. Obviously, the 3 weeks being out is gonna hurt a little. We'll see how he comes back as soon as tonight. They're playing the Brooklyn Nets, 2 a.m. Israel time between Sunday and Monday. So that's going to be his first game back. Hopefully, he'll be good and just get better.
Well, best of luck to Denny and the Wizards, and thank you so much, Yaron, for this great interview, and best of luck with your project.
Thank you very much for having me again.
All the best. All right, on that note, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight and tomorrow call for clear and lovely skies with lows this evening averaging at a cool 49 degrees Fahrenheit or about 10 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow's highs averaging at 73 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. And now, just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. So this video wasn't taken in Israel, but it's going extremely viral in Israel. This adorable dog is copying his owner after he noticed that he had a leg injury, limping along beside him. Man's best friend, what can I say? All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.28 shekels to the American dollar and 2.56 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and let us know what you think. Subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Lauren Izzo. Thank you for watching.